Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashtarothi, the voice of New Eden, and this is the Eve Chronicle Jita 4-4. Part 1. It's after 9 p.m. at the terminal when I arrive. Most shuttles are switching out 15-minute schedules for 30-minute ones now. People draw together and wait, struggling to distract themselves in the seemingly endless space between. Bars, vending machines, and VR booths fill every corner large enough to house them, offering a quick, easy, and overpriced escape from the intentionally gray concrete walls, illuminated only by the cold monotone of fluorescent lights. Pale and bloodless in this false glow, everyone looks like a vampire, something I would describe as convenient. Now begins the dead hours, when things start to calm down, if you could describe anything here in those terms. Jita 4-4 may be one of the busiest hubs in the universe, particularly for the Capsuleers, but the eternal dominance of the circadian rhythm makes itself known even here. Fewer shuttles leaving now? That's the station slowing her breath. Really, it's us, our collective breath, but in everything now is the human imprint, for better or worse. One rule is you can't sleep here. For me, tired of traveling through the haphazard network from a station out deep on the frontiers, this particular custom is unfortunate. You see, despite my much younger exterior, today marks a much older birthday. And without getting too technical about it, I haven't slept in over 3 days. I've kind of forgotten how right now, and there's a moment in the lull, that seductive daydream that creeps up on me when I least want it. Nevertheless, when in state space, I will do my best to behave. This is because the massive rotor of station attendants, security officers, and information advisors will actually wake you and remind you, as they like to say. Ma'am, I would like to remind you that there's no sleeping allowed in Terminal 1. As if you'd actually forgotten, as if you'd intended to lie asleep there invulnerable, while anonymous passerbys sidestepped your defenseless, lifeless body. As if you wanted to fall into that trap. As if you were, well, cattle. They take a note, you see, and attach it to your temporary station ID. That's your first and only warning. The second time you drift off, they don't say anything. They just start the clock. If you wake up before 10 minutes is over, that's 2. 3 is either 10 minutes or a third nod off. You think I'm kidding? You think that there's no way that they'd bother with this shit? Well, everything has a protocol. It's hard parameters. It's bottom line. Well, where are we again? Exactly. 3 times converts those little annotations into vagrancy charge. 3 times converts those little annotations into a vagrancy charge. Offenders are removed roughly, quickly, and without a word. Vagrants don't deserve to be read their rights, because by definition, they effectively have none. Now, I remember a few decades earlier, everyone would fall into this trap. There were actual vagrant types, dreary-eyed Mimitar with the signature soothsayer drool, clearly homeless and reeking of their own shit. And then there were the Caldari businessmen, upper management types. Rules that don't apply, they think. Usually their first time here from some outer region post, Lone Trek or something like that. Even those guys, dressed in suits worth more than the yearly salary of the 3 men unceremoniously hauling their still-waking, half-confused, designer-labeled clad asses out of here, even the mighty could be treated like the lowest. Nobody, though, as far as I can see, has stumbled just yet. I've come here to remind myself of the Caldari, and that's also why I take the stims. There's the enjoyment factor, sure, but it has more to do with my aversion to the cold cement streets and the types of people who roam them until dawn. There's vampires out there, too. Blame the circadian rhythm or something. As for what I'm doing here, well, let's just say, for now, that I don't want to fall asleep. In actuality, this has very little to do with what might await me out there, and more to do with my lack of temporary station ID. We're all supposed to have one, you see. Otro Goryushi was 19, the first civilian number available on the rotating register. Even he, Otro Gariushi. My first stop is the food court. The primary one, that is. The one on the side of the 4 Mind Clash arenas that dominate the entrance to Terminal 1. You can't miss it. The place simply isn't designed that way. It's a 4 by 9 kilometer sprawl of gastronomical consumerism like you've never seen before. People come here just for this. Everything you could ever want. From the fast and nasty, there's actually a vendor or two that runs by this name, Mimitar braised soups, to the most exquisite fine dining in the mezzanine. There's nothing quite as fresh as Jita. Jump drives brought about some amazing changes. They helped us reshape our world with dramatic speed and efficiency. Here in Jita at the ground level, though, I'm reminded of the ways that we've bent this technology towards more base means. I say this because I can smell another human imprint, and it's something like the salty tang of freshly caught fish, maybe just a little over an hour old. Back then, full of life, swimming upstream towards nothing under one of another of any number of alien skies. I followed the scent and pretended to be able to discern where, which planet, which continent, which settlement. Perhaps somewhere in Uralin. I consider near one of the polar settlements, where the magnetic fields create those wonderfully hypnotic purple skylines with clean, bright stars shining through the thin atmosphere. Perfect, low-cost real estate for entrepreneurial fisheries. Must be even cheaper now, I realize, given the proximity of the planet to market hubs, and the latest Concord madness allowing capsuleers to drop extractors wherever they damn please. Forgetting for a moment what I am, in some ways, I'm back to imagining rivers of pure glacial water, artificially rich with the most economically favorable species of the month. Then I imagine that fish, driven only by blind instinct, as it slides inexorably down towards some dark fate. I imagine an inevitable murky and cold end. A net, perhaps. But it's somehow not likely to be that romantic. These artificial rivers tend to be quite literally purpose-built in the end, with the flow of water eventually heading right towards the abattoir. The Caldari have made it efficient to the point where you have to question their use of the word fishing. What's important, though, is that from this stream, it finds its way to a warehouse, maybe 10 minutes or less, as these things tend to be built into the actual rivers as well, at least if we're sticking to the Erland fisheries. Another 20 minutes and that fish is loaded onto a cargo bay of a freighter, and then perhaps swims around for a few hours inside of a giant plastic-lined bags filled with life-sustaining fluids, waiting for the launch. Then, most likely our fish dies somewhere in orbit. If the acceleration out of the atmosphere is a bit rocky, a space elevator is most likely just as inevitable here. After at least another 10 minutes, it's at a station, and this can be pretty much anywhere in the known cluster if you have a long enough SinoNet, and the best traders always do. After that, it's all those hours spent dying, loading, launching, warping, docking. After all that, our fish is in something with a jump drive. Within seconds, it's here and in the hands of some of the Federation's finest culinary experts, where those succulently smoked and sautéed and skewered atoms permeate the domed terraces, filtering out downwards before they slowly muted by the dull mix of cheaper breads and spices. I try to imagine just how many different atoms from how many different planets must be colliding around here right now. Cosmologically speaking, Jita's must be a meeting ground for them like no other place ever before, in all of human history. All because of isotopes, sinusoidal fields, and jump drives. Think about that the next time you're dropping off for a bite, because it's important to realize how some of this came about. I've come here to remind myself of the Galente. If you've ever doubled the capitalistic might of their corporate giants, you should make a visit to them too sometime. The entire area is dominated by their cuisine, which in a way makes sense, since Gallente food accommodates everyone. It has to. If you ever thought politics or laws were the primary concern of an infinitely fractured populace, think again. Think about tonight's dinner. I know I am. One of the great accomplishments of the Federation's food services industry was the way that they managed to slowly absorb their competitors. They did this through subtle and well-applied use of the nation's media influence, which extends across all empire's borders. A predictable tactic, sure, but effective as anything. They don't play the Caldari corporate game either, and that actually gives them some advantages when operating in state space and abroad, even during the wars, when everything was supposedly turning to shit. I suppose the most insidious thing about their commercial success isn't the level of trickery employed on their own consumer base, but rather the more fundamentally repugnant facelessness of it all. To survive economically in your opponent's commercial nexus like this, you have to lose your face. You have to become about something entirely impersonal. You have to become about a system, about a way of doing things. This is why people will talk about diversity found in Gallente cuisine. That's one of the darker sides of it. To most people, this is perceived as something slightly simpler. They say that the Gallente have copied every other nation's cuisine, made fusions of it and called it their own, branded it as their own. This captures the essence of the issue, but doesn't identify the core. These people say that we've arrived at the point where it's no longer even clear who owns what anymore. Hyperbole. Trademarks keep that perfectly clear, if only for the lawyers. Most consumers don't even understand the most rudimentary networks of corporation ownership. The favorite topic among economists is the strange way, particularly strange to the Caldari, the Gallente economic model worked on pushing everything into the public domain and then recycling it again and again, making it just different enough to satisfy the trademark. This is part of what I mean when I say that they don't play the Caldari game. But again, people overlook how it was accomplished. It's not all they overlook either. You see, for most people at Jita 4.4 and abroad in state space, it's enough that the logo on the restaurant that they're eating at is a Caldari one. And for the Gallente business owners and entrepreneurs, it's enough that a little playing pretend is all that it takes to keep dishing out foods of every type as they attempt to corner, or most commonly invent, another niche in the already hypersaturated market. Everyone knows the game, but their apathy to such things is well ingrained. Take the salted Amarian rockjaw. Now this thing is a beast of a creature, quite familiar with the interiors of Amarian torture chambers too. It has a rather sweet taste, with a fresh salty aroma to the flesh. You can have that in Dorel with a side of Arcuran songbird wings in a sweet nut and berry sauce. This meal, to anyone there who eats it, is unquestionably Amarian. It is tasteful, politically correct marriage of Empire State cuisine. Perfect for high-profile business lunches, if you want to keep hiccup-free, depending on your client, of course. A little further down, off the High Roller's mezzanine, and onto one of the many corridors spanning the nebulous web below, you can get more adventurous with the rockjaw at every corner. At Pomoka Caravan Delights, you can have it seared over traditional Brutoricari oven, and then watch as it slowly deskewered and served alongside tender pieces of traditional Petor steak, bloody and still rich with life besides their impaled counterparts. Some meals speak for themselves, and many do, in fact, have something to say. This one says, I am an unquestionably Mimmathar. But in every one of these restaurants, all you will ever see is pretty severe girls waiting tables with silverly circular logo of the state out front. Meanwhile, in the engine room, it is most often Gallente chefs who will be driving things forward, not just at Pomoka, but at Dorelli, and almost anywhere else you care to look behind the curtain. The Caldari think that they're exploiting the labor of the Gallente, and the Gallente think that they're influencing Caldari culture, one mouthful at a time. The Amara Mimitar? Shit, they ain't even really there. They're just ghosts, puppet apparitions, dancing on the tune of friends and foes up north. And this hasn't ever really changed. I'm opting for a low-profile bite and run here, though, and keeping my mind off the stakes, so I stop off at quaif snacks. The food here is, I suppose you could say, the very bottom line. It's not like Quaif hides it either. They have Quaif Snacks Premium and Quaif Snacks Premium Ultra vendor stands, and Quaif Deluxe Premium, Quaif Elite restaurants plastered all over the courtyards as well. If you're at this particular franchise, you don't really have any illusions as to why. Personally, I find a sort of perverse, gimmicky joy in watching the families order and endure. Most of the food here comes exceptionally cheap, you see. But there are no tables and no seats. The consuming crowds have to disperse and eat among the milling populace at tables and ledges near elevators, escalators, walkways, and, best of all, in waiting rooms packed with people killing time on empty stomachs. All designed, you see. The bags that carry their food project subtle holograms above, a small news ticker, the current air temperature, arrivals and departures, station announcements, all to the side, but all but consumed by the cool neon green of a Quaif logo. Then there is perfectly manufactured scent to it all, the look of satisfaction and enjoyment. It's the best way for me to blend in, you see. Become just another billboard. Yep, you can do pretty much anything here, except sleep. It's a non-starter for me anyways. If I fall asleep, then they'll see soon enough. They'll notice the sockets at the base of the neck, telltale signs of trouble. While pleasantly dreaming, I'd be giving them an excuse, a reason, a motivation to look closely enough, and they'd realize quickly what I am. In these situations, were we uncovered, alone and incognito, lurking among the masses, they find it easier to just shoot us. When Capsuleers are involved, it's the only path with a predictable end. If they woke me and let me know that they know, well, who knows what would happen next? I could be loaded with nanite viruses, armed with invisible spy drones, laced with biological contaminants. Who knows? Maybe. I'm here to take a hit contract on some civilian in the crosshairs of a person with too much money and some serious grudges. Just walk up to them, and as they amble tiredly towards a shuttle, and then boom, spray, bang, zap. Who knows? But it's lights out either way, and I'm laughing all the way to the nearest clone bank. I could be here to solve all kinds of problems, or, I suppose, cause them. Whatever it is, it's assured by default that whenever a Capsuleer is trying to blend in with the baseliners, beelining, as they say, rather repugnant if you consider it, it is not because they're here to mingle. Besides, the mechanics of it all for them is the same as mine. They have the authority to act with lethal force at a moment's notice. Against us, that is. Hidden, uncovered, that is enough. Beyond that, they have impunity. Me, us, we always had it. So they get to catch up. A dangerous game I don't want to play. Some of you would just not believe the rumors I've heard. The stories of opportunistic savagery unleashed upon our kind when nobody gives a damn is looking. I hope a kind yet firm bluff will be all it takes. I know exactly what they fear, even better than they do. This counts for a great deal. I understand their countermeasures, and when you know their paths back to safety, you command attention. They, sadly, only have one go at this. For me, this is practice. Something to keep my senses sharp after a long while doing nothing much, just mixing it up. Blame the circadian rhythm. As for what I'm doing here, now, deep inside of a sub-basement level, following two Brutors who smell of alcohol, made from fermented Amarian wheat, I establish, but I keep to myself. Well, I'm following the scent. I'm here to remind myself of the Matari. Always preferred that term. But more specifically, I'm making a purchase. More particularly, drugs. And to be explicit, we're talking some quite rare ones that have, curiously, become far cheaper in recent times. Recent meaning here in the weeks, months, and years following the wormhole openings. Strange, right? Well, anyone complaining, making a public scene of that fact? exactly. C3FTM, C3-fluorotris methanocarboxylic acid, in case you wondered. I used to have to go to the mezzanine for this, and I remember how awkward it would be to order such tiny quantities in ushered tones, surrounded by an opulence that outstripped the value of my purchase by an order of magnitude. Obviously, the station of demand and supply was complicated back then. Now all I have to do is hook up with the local Mimitar smugglers, follow these two Brutors, and soon enough I'd have a whole fucking crate for the price of the meals I used to have to order as a disguise. Maybe you'll understand now why I'm no cynic to be asking, what's the catch? Following these two along this dimly lit artery towards some unknown destination, I'm listening to a crisp monetary tone as it played out throughout the invisible loudspeakers embedded in the walls, perfectly audible, even down here in the bowels of the station. The two Brutor looked over their shoulders at me for an explanation. They understand the game, but they don't get the language. I shrug a nothing you need to worry about and keep the pace down the darkened corridor. It's interesting that they grasp this much. Perhaps the operation here isn't so reckless as I initially thought. My immediate suspicion is that I'm about to run into one of my own kind, or at least another Capsuleer. Close enough. That's one of the games, you see. Or one of the ways they divide us, class us, speak to us. Look at us how you want. I see a game. In these momentary audio blips, there's another, secondary message. A heavily compressed meta stream lying obfuscated beneath the expertly crafted static and white noise. All of it neatly engineered into a fleeting, innocuous beep. Inside each one, there's quite often a horde of information. Here, in this one, is a neurovisual map marking VIP elevator access points, secure comms lines, security posts, and of course, advertisements for restaurants, accommodations, and other venues that are all kilometers above where we are now, and with price tags to match. It's one part survival guide to beelining, and one part here's what you're missing down there. Maybe you'll understand, too, why I wasn't about to explain this to one of my Brutor guides. That? Oh, it's an advertisement for 4,600,000 ISK shoes, and a map showing 25 of the quickest routes out of here. These guys just stare ahead and continue briskly along a hard right into a sharply twisting staircase that drops rapidly below what I thought had to be the bottom of the station. I'm beginning to wonder how close we are to the surface, to the vacuum outside. Everything is quiet, save for the low hum of ventilation ducts, occasionally rattling a new breath of hot air through those dimly lit catacombs. I imagine it all coming apart for a moment, and imagine surviving. There's a comfort in the thought. After some time, we arrive at the door. The two men stand beside it, as it opens inwardly. I move to step inside, and just from the way they both turn towards me, I know that this is as far as I come. Staring inwards from the outside, I am met by what appears to be a plainly dressed Verrocchio seated behind a desk with a wooden antiquated drawers that sound like they're run on ball bearings. She's writing something out on paper. Surrounding her are rows after rows of bookshelves, each filled with crates of drugs, and, from what I can see, the odd weapon, too. I reel instinctively before I can restrain the impulse. She notices this and smiles, lowering the pencil. She's dressed like a commoner, it seems, but the way she carries herself and commands this strange scene screams money and influence, and comfort in deception. Yes, we're a bit old school here, she says, looking through the licks of her perfectly straight hair, arranged traditionally Verrocchio style, no jewelry, unless you count rubber bands. So much for not leaving a paper trail. With the copycat pretension of it all, I can't help screwing with her a little bit. Tension is adrenaline, and adrenaline is good. It keeps you awake. C3FTM, she inquires, ignoring the jab. I nod. Of course. Glad to help. The cost? She can tell I'm not really asking, that I don't need to ask. She can see the subtext. She nods in turn. Not much these days. I hold her gaze. You seem curious about why, hmm? I suppose you could say I am, I tell her. She waves me inside. Then we can probably help each other. Here. Come. I step inside as she opens another door at the rear of the room, and follow her into a narrow hallway lit by cold blue beams, all of them reflected in meticulously designed angles across the cavernous metal spaces above us, perfectly placed as though everything is ricocheting along the straight, rigid lines of Caldari steel. Perhaps I should say Caldari steel, since it's their product here. Something that looks like a turret is trained on me as I follow her, swiveling from its mount in the ceiling as it slowly spreads a web of red light over me. Not sure what that was. Is it still about C3? I'm asking, raising my hands out of an antiquated instinct. The Verrocchio is looking over her shoulder at me as she slides out of the dirty robes around her, revealing a head-to-toe capsuleer pod suit beneath, black with white lining. Must be a YC-111 style. Of course, she replies. We can speak in confidence here. You do realize. I don't. We reach the end of the hallway and stop at another door. She looks at me strangely. I can see a sense of revelation slowly growing in her expression. I'm supposed to be realizing something here too, but, well, they could be any number of things just yet. You're home, amongst company, she said quietly, sensing the reason for my hesitation as she stares about this strange room before us. But there's something practiced about the way she does it, and something definitely wrong about the way her eyes follow me whenever she looks. I think she recognizes me. No, I say. I think you're mistaken. I'm not here because I'm... She begins, leaving the rest for me to fill in as the door before us slides away. I'm here because I know a Sabbac when I see one, I hear her say, just barely. The room ahead of me is supposed to be a lounge of some kind, but I realize its double use as someone's bedroom, not hers, a man. She stops at the edge of a few small steps leading down to a sunken central area, furnished only by a large circular couch, overflowing with blue and purple cushions. I think she's motioning for me to sit, perhaps, but she's leading me away down one side of the room towards a ledge. Something else I recognize. Silver panels stretch across the room, adorned with tiny glowing buttons of various colors. Understated. I like it. But I keep this to myself. She's probably noticed anyhow. Each color clustered in groups of 4. That's synth, standard, improved, and strong variants, and arrayed in pleasantly cascading rows. I want to keep the bloodstream legal as possible. So if she offers, synth? She asks, already at least one step ahead of me. She spins around to face me, her left hand now resting on one of the panels. Pastel sky colors grading to a dark inky ocean blue. That would be the blue pill. Tried the NOH variant yet? She asked. I shake my head. On me, she motions. Her fingers lift away the blues and float towards the panel of warm orange lights. I'm reminded again of the first room I entered through. That would be Mind Flood, and all 4 of her fingers now resting on the smooth bumps in the otherwise impeccable smooth surface. I suppose that's her way of saying I won't be the only one about to let my guard down. I stare as she presses down and hear the pressurized shots of chemicals escaping the tiny nodes. Slightly stronger, still legal, she says, inhaling gently as she rubs her wrist and turns towards the couch. For a moment I regard the panel that houses the release button. Sky blue like the other, but with tiny little NOH logo on the top to differentiate. Interesting, I say as I indulge. She glides over to the edge of the couch effortlessly and takes a seat at what appears to be the head of it. I hadn't noticed this in the design until now. I feel slightly dizzy as I climbed over and seat myself in the acceptably middle ground distance. Not too close, not too far. There's a stupid amount of cushions here. I feel like I'm in a playpen. I kick a few away from my feet. Make yourself comfortable, she says. Strange setup you have here. I'm saying before really considering it. Kind of hard to. In truth, I'm starting to sink a little into this thing and relax. But that's more down to the NOH's latest pharmaceutical sleight of hand than this overcrowded cushionotopia. Cushionocracy? Yes, definitely thanks to NOH. I'm curious about C3, the Verrokier says, almost absent-mindedly. I'm curious about that Sabik remark, but I suppose we can get to that. I turn to her. She doesn't seem interested in staring games anymore. What in particular, I ask. I just handle the goods, she says. I don't need to understand much beyond the basics. C3 is interesting, though. Is it? I don't even bother saying it. I can feel my expression betraying me enough to make the point. She looks at me like it's some big secret, some vast conspiracy. I'm not quite sure what to say. I asked her how long she's been a capsuleer. 3 years. That's a good amount of time, longer than I'd guessed. I explained to her that C3 isn't really a drug. You don't get high off the shit. It's a performance enhancer of sorts. You have to be able to know how to use it, though, and what it offers isn't all that remarkable. In fact, it's only useful in certain situations. She asks what situations, naturally. Imagine, I tell her, that you're outside your capsule, and what you need to do there isn't all that complex. Maybe you need to meet someone, or want to get something to eat at a real restaurant, maybe sleep in a real bed. Of course, this isn't hard to imagine, really. We're both unplugged right now. She nods, a slight sense of impatience about her. I give a bear with me sort of expression and shift up in my seat, kicking another cushion away. I can tell that she's getting progressively more high, too, just by the way she watches it sail over the edge. For a situation like this, or at least some of them, I tell her, you don't really need your childhood memories or your knowledge of how to pilot jump freighters. And the more situational your needs are, the more you can narrow it down, the less you need to bring along. She's asking if I'm talking about selective memory, compartmentalizing different parts of ourselves into different areas, in her words, not mine. I'm nodding. C3 helps with this, I explain. She seems genuinely interested in the idea. Whether because of its potential or historical application, I can't tell. This outcome is altogether quite surprising, although not at all unanticipated. Firstly, I'm still not convinced that these capsuleers, there are more here, and 5 exits, 2 unguarded, aren't just posers. And this overextension, this trying too hard veneer, isn't just the surface-deep summation of who and what they really are. I don't pick them for it, but she said Sabik, which is an interesting differentiation to be making, even if I do have the unfortunate tendency of reading far too much into these often thoughtless remarks. I'm following the beams of blue light on their path around the room, wondering if she's even meaning to screw with me. Because part of this must be ego. My ego, that is, feeding into it, making this more significant than it is. Of course, part of it. Part of. Then, of course, there was that half-decade stint a few decades ago with the Blood Raiders, and then the Satogas, and Mabin, and all that. An irrelevant association in the grander scheme of things, but with our inaction comes various labels and categories, families and friendships, little tones on the loudspeakers that you can either hear or don't. I didn't drink blood, if that's what you're thinking. I'm not a freaking literal, and Omer wouldn't ever have the pleasure of seeing my ass, let alone kissing it. Sabik, you said earlier, I noted with stressed hesitation, meaning... Part of the reason it escaped my lips so perfectly natural is because I don't even have a clue anymore myself. She's folding her arms again and pushing off the seat slightly, taking an artificially long time to consider her answer. She can tell I'm after something important in the reply. She leans over and reaches out. A man I hadn't noticed until now, another Egger, is handing her a small metal crate. The vials within, which I recognize, even though they're slightly updated and, well, enlarged. The tubes used to be millimeters thick at their very largest, usually much, much smaller, microns typically, in the early days' first contact. She is holding what appears to be over 7 liters. She eyes me all the way over, smiling in a predatory way as she offers the canister, her emaciated arms trembling slightly with the weight. This is a whole lot of shit, no matter what way you're looking at it. Meaning, happy birthday. Perhaps I've been moving too fast. Perhaps I've not explained enough to you yet. You don't really understand where we are, what made it possible, or even what a capsuleer is. You certainly won't appreciate what happens next until you grasp a few basics, and you're far from that. Well, that would be my intention, yes. But this is how it started out, you see. I'm not about to give you any advantages. Take it from someone who actually became a capsuleer, from someone who knows more than enough, that we all begin here, drowning in the deep end, trying to make sense of these things. Jita 4.4 is a great place to start. It's designed to disorient you. If you can start to make sense of it, though, you'll start to understand a great deal. But try to understand also that it won't make this easy on you, for the simplest reason that it wasn't easy on me. Sorry, I won't make this easy on you. Part 2. I'll take us back a little now, before Jita 4.4 even really existed, to the dawn of the capsuleer era. Some associates of mine at the time discovered that I wasn't just good at their cloning technology. I was capsule compatible too. New arrangements were made. I was second cohort. Joining in the first rush would have drawn a little too much attention, you see. So I waited a year and joined in YC 106. The first few hours of being a true, proper egger, you don't really remember. Not years later, not when everything you've accomplished leaves those early days as embarrassing reminders of your own primitive imprint on this most advanced piece of technology. Even for me, that was true. Of course, not everybody feels this way about it. Some can recite their graduation days with the clarity that borders between eerie and pathetic, most often as part of some well-rehearsed yet banal anecdote about their early days. These are the sorts of people you see in the Navy. The point is, you don't really remember because you don't really appreciate what the hell it is that you're doing in that egg, or what you're capable of. Not yet. You might remember getting pats on the head from some instructor agents, and the rush of your first few warps and flights, but that shit's all peripheral to the larger picture. That needs time to grow in your mind. And if you got the right type of head for it, you'll start to realize important things sooner or later. The first thing to understand is that capsuleers can have the wealth of nations, the influence of nations, and most importantly of all, the sovereignty of nations. Many of us get to the first point. There are countless numbers of us now, colonizing the outer worlds, building corporations and alliances that exist and operate outside of the purview of the empires. Of course, the four nations are not exactly underrepresented up here. They have their own massive fleets, and they are many of their own kind who have taken their loyalties with them to the stars, whose patriotism has not been diminished by the drastic changes that fate has afforded us. Some are just scarred of that endless dark out there, where not even Concord can protect capsuleers from their own kind. They have little to be afraid of, and yet, so often, people, my people, claim that there is absolutely nothing to fear. This is nonsense. Which brings us to the second thing that eventually dawns. And on a diminishing scale now, down to the thousands, the second realization that all capsuleers can die. They are not immortal. Many of my kind refuse to acknowledge this, but it's quite obvious. Standard capsuleer recloning relies on the use of mind-state transfer technology, which transfers consciousness from one highly controlled environment to another, body A inside of a capsule, an egg, and body B, for Plan B, in a cloning facility. The important phrase here is highly controlled environment. You can't say it is anything else. A scanner pores over your brain, capturing every last thought, every memory, every personality defect, and it does this why? Because your capsule was breached. Because someone just proved how fragile that egg really is. And that cloning facility you wake up in? That cloning facility is surrounded by some of the most high-clearance people in the field. These invisible caretakers who oversee the rebirth of the universe's elite. They have a job with an importance like no other in the world, and with it, surveillance and monitoring you won't see anywhere else either. They are the real bodyguards. If a corporate CEO is waking up in one of these facilities, his contingent on the ground has already failed. And this, the most sacred of contingency plans, now depends on the people in white suits. Obviously, not everyone is comfortable with that, least of all us Capsuleers, who won't often admit how tenuous our grip on everything really is. Why? Because these people in white suits can make things go horribly wrong for you and me. I think that the reason we've started installing cloning vats in our largest, most powerful ships has less to do with the logistics and more to do with trust issues. Regardless, there are contingencies for such obvious threats. If you have the resources to implement them, the point to take away from this idea is that your plan for immortality relies on you never having to ask questions like what happens when these become not so highly controlled environments. Then chances are that your plan isn't really worth shit. Most of us still trust the system, eating the crap served to us without ever really wondering who cooked it up, if you catch my meaning. As for the third thing, we need to return to that moment of capsular breach, when your brain is scanned and transmitted via your capsule back to that facility. The third thing is to realize that in this moment, the capsuleer has become data. Maybe for only a second, half a second, even less in reality. But for that moment, we are nothing but zeros and ones as we fly across light years of space in between heartbeats. It's so short that almost nobody recognizes the importance of this moment, and it's something only a few of us even want to appreciate. The idea of the infomorph. The question, what if we just stayed out there and never returned to another clone? What if we could live out there and build a bright and better world in that space between? And this has been Jita44. Thank you guys for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me if you can. Let me know what other Chronicles you would like me to focus on. And before we leave, I'd like to thank my patrons of BlackRoseNoble, Serenalen, Syliana Vel'ash, Nephilim, Grendel, MidnightSpaceMonkey, Talking in Stations, Dajat Lemmont, Grey White, and of course, Elange Leet, Ebo Leet and Elange, my immortal patrons. Thank you all for watching. I've been Ashtarothi, the voice of New Eden. Until next time, I'll see you in space.